Now that we've debunked Sajid's claims, let's move on to another major issue. Many Madkhalis are agents of governments. This is why they're rightfully considered bootlickers. I'm not saying that every Madkhali is a government agent. I'm not saying that Sajid is a government agent, but clearly some of these Madkhalis are working for certain agencies. And there's a lot of proof for this. But before looking at the proof, let's consider some of the primary characteristics of the Madkhalis and how they operate online. Number one, they work hard to block any criticism of the secular rulers in the Muslim world. Number two, they legitimate the killing of Muslims who criticize the secular rulers. This is why the Madkhalis love using the word Khawarij or Khariji. They use the word Khawarij because they know that that makes a person's blood halal. It justifies killing. The Madkhalis could say, "Hey Daniel, you're criticizing the ruler because you're a jahil or you're a deviant." But they don't do that. They always have to add the label Khariji or Khawarij. This is precisely for the purpose of Islamically legitimizing lethal actions by secular tyrants against their Muslim critics. Also, Madkhalis focus on the secondary and tertiary issues of deen and not the usul. This is again deliberate. They want to rip the community apart and cause as much division as possible. Disagreeing with other Muslims is not enough for them. They have to disassociate and boycott. Sajid, for example, could have easily said, "Look, I have a difference of opinion with Daniel on this minor issue," and left it at that. But no, Sajid has to go back and delete any video with me and make this huge spectacle of washing his hands clean of me. Did I violate some major principle of the deen? Did I innovate an entirely new position in Islam? Or did I distort the deen for the sake of selling out? Did I call for reforming Islam? No, but it doesn't matter for Madkhalis. What matters to them is putting the issue of criticizing the ruler at the center of their aqidah, and then making their entire da'wah about attacking whoever doesn't agree on this one issue. The other characteristic of Madkhalis is that whenever they see Muslims collaborating across different madhahib or manahij, they quickly attack that. This is part of their strategy to create as much division between Orthodox, traditional Muslims as possible. Another characteristic is that they will not agree to debate. They are fine typing up tweet after tweet, but if you challenge them to a debate or to discuss issues openly, they reject those offers. The thing is, this particular combination of traits is unprecedented in Islamic history. These traits combined are unique to the Madkhalis, and the reason is the Madkhalis are a product of intelligence agencies. Their cult has been designed by intelligence agencies as a kind of a virus with the purpose of causing as much division and infighting amongst conservative Sunni Muslims as possible. Part of the proof for this is that there is official documentation recommending the US government secretly fund Madkhalis. Consider the figure of Jarrett Brackman, a high-level US counterterrorism official affiliated with the CIA, who also served as director of research at West Point's Combating Terrorism Center. West Point is the top US military academy training its army officers. In his book, Global Jihadism, page 29, Brackman explains the US military's understanding of who exactly the Madkhalis are. Quote, Arab states have generally viewed the Madkhali Salafists as palatable, much like the establishment Salafists, given their endorsement of secular and democratic forms of government and their unflinching support for local Arab regimes. With Saudi backing, the Madkhalis have firmly entrenched themselves globally, operating out of most Western countries. They have also gone online, so Muslims anywhere around the world can download Madkhali's teachings. In Saudi Arabia, members of the group are more commonly referred to as Jamis and are known for their hostility to any political tendency that opposes the authorities. What this is saying is that authorities in the Gulf fund and install the Madkhalis on a global scale. But there is more. West Point produces strategic recommendations for U.S. military and national security. In a report published in 2006 titled Stealing Al-Qaeda's Playbook, the authors make a very interesting recommendation to counter radical jihad. Quote, the United States should very carefully and unobtrusively support Muslim religious leaders and movements that can effectively compete with the jihadi movement in terms of mass appeal and popularity among the youth. Naturally, many of the most effective competitors will not be friendly to the United States and the West, but if the bottom line is a rejection of violence against the United States and its allies, they should be supported. The difficulty comes in identifying the right leader or group. The US could discreetly fund mainstream Salafi figures like Madkhali, who are effective in siphoning off support from jihadis, and figures who do not advocate violence, for example, by paying for publications, lectures, new schools. This will be effective in the short term. Again, it is essential that the US hand not be seen. The US government is using the word jihadi to refer to any Muslim who supports political Islam. Any Muslim who wants to live in a country ruled by the Sharia, as opposed to liberal secularism, is considered an extremist and a threat by the US government and its secular allies in the Muslim world. Therefore, the strategic recommendation from US counter-extremism officials is to support and secretly fund the Madkhalis, as we just read. And it makes sense. The US needs to keep secular tyrants in full control. Any kind of criticism of these tyrants will delegitimize those regimes, so they secretly fund Madkhalis to attack any critic of these regimes and spread the view that it is not only haram, but actually a deviance or khuruj to raise a peep against any ruler. The behavior of Madkhalis makes it very apparent that they are agents. Let's briefly consider one example. One of the main English-speaking Madkhalis on social media is Faris al-Hamadi. As recently as 2015, Hamadi was just a gym owner in Dubai who coached people on CrossFit. For some years, his content was mainly in the Arabic language. But for some reason, 5 years ago, he suddenly started making videos in English and posting TikTok videos aimed at English-speaking Muslims, teaching them basic things like how to make wudu or how to pray. What's interesting is that intermixed with his videos about how to make wudu, Hamadi throws in a video about the top 4 Khawarij of our times and how the best thing the ruler of the UAE ever did was throw the Muslim Brotherhood in prison. In a 2020 interview, Dawah Man introduces Faris by saying he worked for the government and was involved with, quote, training other governments.
14 years experience in the corporate world. He does training workshops as a part of a government program for other countries' governments,
It is not clear what Faris was training governments in. A lot of questions can be asked about Hamadi and his connection to the UAE government. But we won't get into all the details for this video. But a good sample to see exactly what Faris al-Hamadi is all about is how he dedicates a whole video to brazenly promoting the normalization of ties between Israel and the UAE.
About the normalization, the treaty that happened between the UAE and Israel. Treaties and relationships, political relationships with one country to another, this is the responsibility of not us, of the ruler.
He is referring to the Abraham Accords, which we know is a pure Zionist product designed to put Muslims under the boot of Israel.
Brothers and sisters, consider this, and this is very important. Don't let your emotions control you. Emotions don't drive and create facts. These big complex matters, this is, like I said, it's not up to us to discuss and analyze and give opinions on. As far as Islam is concerned, normalization with the Jews is actually permissible, and it's actually the responsibility of the ruler. He sees whether this is beneficial or not.
This is how this agent throws our Palestinian brothers and sisters under the bus in order to deflect criticism from his masters in the UAE. It is absolutely disgusting, but he doesn't even stop there.
How do Palestinians handle betrayal of Saudi and UAE with Israel? There is no betrayal. We're supporting Palestinians all the way. The betrayal is happening from the Palestinians themselves, actually. The betrayal is happening from the Palestinians themselves, actually.
In this short video that Hamadi uploaded, he is asked how Palestinians handle the betrayal of the Saudi and UAE governments in their diplomatic and economic partnership with Israel. This smug agent smiles through his teeth and says, Saudi and UAE support Palestine, but the betrayal is coming from Palestinians. How did the Palestinians betray Saudi and UAE, Faris? Did they betray you by getting bombed? Did they betray you by getting their children murdered and their homes destroyed? How exactly did the Palestinians betray you, Faris? How did they betray Saudi and the UAE? Please explain that for us. Interestingly, Hamadi has a special obsession with me and our brother Mohammed Hijab. He has dedicated numerous videos and tweets to calling us out as deviants and khawarij. He claims we are deviants because we engage in debates. Debating against liberalism, feminism, and secularism is somehow deviance for Faris. He also claims that by criticizing Middle Eastern governments, I'm inciting rebellion against rulers. Therefore, I'm a khariji. Now, what is so ironic is that Hamadi has been far more involved with inciting rebellion than anything I have ever said. In 2013, immediately before the coup in Egypt, Hamadi was tweeting against the ruler of Egypt, Mohamed Morsi, and calling for him to be removed. After the coup, Hamadi was celebrating. And in 2016, Hamadi was also tweeting against Erdogan, the ruler of Turkey, right after the coup attempt that happened in Turkey in 2016. Isn't it interesting how Hamadi is in the UAE and he's always praising the rulers in the UAE and the UAE government, and he just happens to be agitating against the UAE's geopolitical enemies like Turkey and Mohamed Morsi of Egypt? Isn't it interesting how Hamadi is so conveniently tweeting this incitement to rebellion right around the time that these coups actually happened? Nothing shady about any of that. But the point is, for someone who supposedly is so worried about rebellion and is so opposed to any and all forms of criticism of the ruler, Hamadi sure has done a lot of exactly that. He just has done it in a selective fashion. Criticizing the Gulf rulers is khuruj, but criticizing the rulers of Turkey and Egypt, that's fine. This is typical of the Madkhalis. Their hypocrisy and double standards on criticizing rulers is well known. Consider this active Madkhali, Wajdi Akkari. Wajdi has dedicated multiple videos to attacking me, calling me a deviant khariji because I criticize rulers, but Akkari has no problem featuring Faris Hamadi on his channel, who has gone way farther than me in calling for the removal of governments and removal of rulers. So why doesn't Akkari delete his video with Hamadi and denounce Hamadi as a deviant khariji? Why the double standard, Wajdi?
Hamas is a hizb, is a cult of people that conspire and work along with the Shia, and they work along with Ikhwan al-Muslimin, and they work along with any type of nonsense. Sheikh Al-Albani said, he says about the movement, it's not an Islamic movement whether you like it or not.
Wow, Wajdi, that sounds an awful lot like criticizing the rulers. Isn't Hamas the rulers in Gaza, in Palestine? Aren't they Muslims? Are you criticizing them in this kind of way? Doesn't that mean you're inciting khuruj and rebellion and bloodshed? Have you no shame? Another example is a good friend of Sajid named Omar Shatila. Shatila is like the Madkhali police on Twitter. He will dedicate hundreds of tweets debating with random no-name accounts to defend his Madkhali cult ideology, spreading all kinds of nonsense that he knows the average Muslim doesn't have enough knowledge to refute. Recently, Shatila violated his own manhaj by publicly criticizing Saudi and saying it does not implement Sharia 100%. Isn't this inciting takfir against the Saudi rulers, Shatila? Aren't you inciting rebellion against the Saudi government? Some of his fellow bootlickers attacked Omar Shatila because Shatila was defending an Egyptian scholar, Sheikh Abu Ishaq al-Huwaini. You can see the bootlickers are outraged. How can you support Huwaini when he sits with the Khawarij and the Ikhwan? Shatila tries his best to defend the Sheikh, but the evidence is overwhelming that the Sheikh is not on the bootlicking manhaj. So in his desperation to defend Sheikh al-Huwaini, Shatila says that he doesn't believe all Ikhwan are Khawarij, which is basically a statement of blasphemy as far as bootlickers are concerned. Shatila even goes one step further and says that supporting protests does not make a person a Khariji or a deviant. Again, this is like a statement of pure blasphemy for bootlickers, which is why they have put Shatila on notice. But putting bootlicker infighting aside for a moment, just think about the logic here from Shatila. According to Omar Shatila, if you criticize Saudi Halloween, you are inciting rebellion, which means you are on the path of the Khawarij and outside of Ahl Sunnah. But if you think protesting in the streets against the rulers is permissible, that does not make you a deviant outside of Ahl Sunnah. That means that going out on the street and protesting a ruler is less of an incitement to rebellion than making a video against Saudi Halloween thousands of miles away. Wow, that makes a lot of sense, Omar. One thing we'll have to keep in mind about the Madkhalis is that they have long beards, they wear thobes, they give this aura of authenticity and authority. But then when you follow them, you realize that their whole message is about not criticizing the Gulf rulers. That's really what their entire dawah is all about. That's the main meat of their dawah, and everything else is just window dressing. It's like the whole facade is to attract conservative Muslims, but the main message is blindly submit to the secular rulers. For those of you paying attention, this is exactly like the compassionate imams and the crypto reformers. The same exact dynamic. They draw in conservative Muslims with their talk of Quran and Sunnah and the scholarly tradition. But then when you listen to them more carefully, you realize that their whole message is feminism and liberalism and democracy and watering down the deen to appease the Western standard. Now, I also mentioned that the Madkhalis are like a virus designed to cause as much division as possible. Let me substantiate that for you. Overall, the whole purpose of Madkhalism is to neutralize conservative Sunni Muslims who don't want to see the Muslim world secularized and dominated by secular Western powers and Israel. The main tactic for neutralizing Sunni Muslims is to divide them and embroil them in infighting. This strategy was explicitly outlined by the Yinon Plan in the 80s, talking about Israeli strategy to dominate Muslims, and more famously by RAND, the highly influential think tank that advises US policy. On page 62 through 64 of RAND's Civil Democratic Islam, RAND lays out a strategy to create division between traditionalists, i.e. madhabis, madhab-following Muslims, and fundamentalists, i.e. Salafis. RAND identifies that the biggest threat to the Western agenda is if conservative Orthodox Sunni Muslims unite. So their strategy is to generate as much division as possible, driving a wedge between madhab-oriented traditional Sunnis and Salafis is critical for their goals. They say this explicitly. As I have said publicly before, Muslim Skeptic aims to unite on the basis of Orthodox Islam against